called themselves soldiers. The Allies called them war criminals. By May 1945, nearly 1 million men wore the double lightning bolts of the Waffen-SS. They had fought on every front, in 38 divisions, from the gates of Moscow to the beaches of Normandy. Yet when Germany surrendered, these men faced a fate no other military formation encountered in modern history. The entire organization was about to be declared criminal. Not individual soldiers, not specific units, the entire Waffen-SS. Every man who wore the uniform would carry the legal designation of belonging to a criminal organization. No pensions, no veteran status, no rehabilitation. They would spend the next decades fighting not on battlefields, but in courtrooms, lobbying halls, and public memory, trying to escape a verdict written into international law. What happened to the Waffen-SS after 1945 is not a simple story of justice served or criminals punished. It is a story of legal precedent, Cold War pragmatism, selective prosecution, political rehabilitation, and a decades-long campaign to rewrite history. Before we go deeper into how this decision changed the war forever, make sure to subscribe for more history that actually happened. The end came in fragments. In Berlin, SS units fought to the last cartridge among burning buildings. In Czechoslovakia, entire divisions surrendered to American forces, desperate to avoid Soviet captivity. In the Baltic states, remnants of foreign volunteer legions melted into forests, knowing return home meant execution. The surrender was not uniform, it was chaotic. Somewhere between 800,000 and 900,000 Waffen-SS soldiers survived to May 1945. Wehrmacht soldiers handed over their weapons and entered prisoner-of-war compounds with a degree of military formality. Waffen-SS soldiers were separated immediately. Allied intelligence officers identified them by the blood group tattoos under their left arms, a marking originally intended to facilitate battlefield transfusions. That small tattoo became a brand. It meant interrogation. It meant segregation. For many, it meant trial. The Western Allies captured the majority. The Soviets captured tens of thousands on the Eastern Front. Many would never return home. On October 1, 1946, the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg delivered its verdicts. Among the judgments was one unprecedented in military history. The tribunal declared the entire SS, including the Waffen-SS, to be a criminal organization. The decision was carefully worded. It applied to all members who joined after September 1939 and who knew of the organization's criminal activities. It exempted those who were conscripted without their knowledge or who had no knowledge of crimes. But the practical effect was sweeping. Membership alone became evidence of potential criminality. The reasoning was clear. The Waffen-SS was not merely the combat branch of the SS. It was integrated into an apparatus responsible for mass murder, administration of concentration camps, and execution of reprisal killings. The tribunal documented cases. The Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler Division massacred American prisoners at Malmedy in December 1944. The Totenkopf Division executed British prisoners at Le Paradis in 1940. The Das Reich Division burned the French village of Oradour-sur-Glane, killing 642 civilians in June 1944. The Dirlewanger Brigade committed atrocities in Warsaw that defied description. These were not isolated incidents. They were patterns of conduct woven into operations. The immediate aftermath was selective prosecution. High-ranking commanders faced tribunals. Josef Sepp Dietrich, commander of the 6th SS Panzer Army, was convicted in the Malmedy massacre trial in 1946 and sentenced to 25 years. Kurt Meyer, commander of the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, was tried by a Canadian court and sentenced to death in December 1945 for the execution of Canadian prisoners in Normandy. His sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. He served 9 years. Joachim Peiper, the field commander at Malmedy, received a death sentence in 1946. It was commuted. He was released in 1956. These trials established a precedent but revealed a problem. There were thousands of lower-ranking officers and enlisted men. The Allies could not prosecute them all. Resources were limited. Political priorities shifted. The Cold War was beginning. Denazification became the mechanism for dealing with the mass of former SS members. In the American, British, and French zones of occupied Germany, military governments implemented a questionnaire system. Every German adult filled out a Fragebogen, a detailed form documenting their activities during the Nazi period. Membership in the Waffen-SS triggered automatic classification in the higher-risk categories. The system divided Germans into 5 groups: major offenders, offenders, lesser offenders, followers, exonerated. Waffen-SS members typically fell into the first 3 categories, depending on rank and documented involvement in crimes. The consequences varied. Some faced internment. Some lost employment rights. Some paid fines. But the system was overwhelmed. By 1948, millions of questionnaires clogged administrative offices. The process became pro forma. Many Waffen-SS veterans received lesser classifications and returned to civilian life within 2 or 3 years of the war's end. The German legal landscape complicated their status. In 1951, the Federal Republic of Germany passed Article 131 of the Basic Law, granting pension rights to former civil servants and professional soldiers of the Wehrmacht. The law explicitly excluded Waffen-SS members. The reasoning was constitutional. Since the Nuremberg Tribunal had declared the SS a criminal organization, the new German state could not legally recognize its members as legitimate soldiers entitled to state pensions. This exclusion became the focus of a lobbying campaign that would last decades. Wehrmacht veterans received pensions. Waffen-SS veterans received nothing. The inequality was stark and to many Germans in the 1950s felt unjust. Veterans argued they had been combat soldiers, not camp guards. They argued they had fought like any other German soldier. They argued the distinction was legal fiction. The West German government refused to change the law. In 1951, former Waffen-SS officers established HIAG, the Hilfsgemeinschaft, auf Gegenseitigkeit der ehemaligen Angehörigen der Waffen-SS, or Mutual Aid Association of former Waffen-SS members. It became the most organized and effective veterans lobbying group in post-war Germany. Its stated purpose was mutual assistance. Its real purpose was political rehabilitation. HIAG campaigned for pension rights, challenged the criminal organization designation, published revisionist literature, and cultivated a narrative that the Waffen-SS had been an elite military formation unfairly smeared by Allied propaganda. The organization published a monthly magazine, Der Freiwillige, which circulated among veterans and sympathizers. The magazine printed obituaries, unit histories, battlefield accounts, and political arguments. It portrayed Waffen-SS soldiers as defenders of Europe against Bolshevism. It minimized or ignored war crimes. It portrayed the Nuremberg verdict as victor's justice. HIAG's influence was significant. In the 1950s, West German politicians courted the votes of veterans. The organization claimed tens of thousands of members and had the ability to mobilize support for political candidates who adopted sympathetic positions. This created a paradox. The Federal Republic of Germany was committed to democratic values and repudiation of Nazism. Yet it needed political stability, and that required integrating former soldiers into society. The result was compromise. Waffen-SS veterans did not receive pensions, but many found employment in the civil service, in industry, and in positions of influence. Denazification had been a temporary inconvenience, not a permanent barrier. The formation of the Bundeswehr in 1955 presented another test. West Germany rearmed as part of NATO. The new military needed experienced officers. Many came from the Wehrmacht. But Waffen-SS veterans faced restrictions. Official policy barred them from service, though the implementation was inconsistent. Some veterans managed to join by concealing their SS affiliation. Others were quietly accepted if their service had been purely combat-related and free of documented atrocities. The Bundeswehr wanted military competence but political distance from the SS. The result was selective exclusion. High-profile SS veterans were kept out. Others slipped through. Cold War realities further complicated the narrative. The United States and its allies needed intelligence on the Soviet Union. They recruited former Wehrmacht and SS officers who had fought on the Eastern Front. The most famous case was Reinhard Gehlen, a Wehrmacht general who had run intelligence operations against the Soviets. After the war, the U.S. Army employed him to create an intelligence network that became the Gehlen Organization. It hired hundreds of former German intelligence officers, some from the SS. The organization operated under American funding and direction until 1956, when it became the Bundesnachrichtendienst, West Germany's Federal Intelligence Service. The moral irony was stark. Men who had served a genocidal regime were now employed by democracies to fight communism. Pragmatism outweighed justice. Foreign volunteers faced harsher consequences. The Waffen-SS had recruited extensively from occupied countries. Belgians, Dutch, French, Norwegians, Danes, Latvians, Estonians, and others had joined, motivated by anti-communism, collaboration, or coercion. After the war, they returned home to accusation of treason. In France, collaborators were tried and executed. In Belgium and the Netherlands, returning SS volunteers faced imprisonment and social ostracism. In the Soviet-occupied Baltic states, the fate was execution or deportation to the Gulag. Latvian and Estonian Waffen-SS veterans who survived tried to flee west. Thousands were held in displaced persons camps for years. Some eventually emigrated to the United States, Canada, Australia, and South America. They carried their secrets and their justifications. For decades they lived quiet lives, rarely speaking of their service. The Nuremberg precedent set by the SS Declaration had unintended consequences. Declaring an entire organization criminal meant that individual guilt had to be demonstrated separately. Trials required evidence. Evidence required witnesses, documents, and resources. As the years passed, memories faded. Witnesses died. Documents were destroyed or lost. By the 1960s and 1970s, prosecutions became rare. In 1958, West Germany established the Central Office of the State Justice Administrations for the investigation of National Socialist crimes. It investigated thousands of cases, but the focus was on concentration camp personnel and Einsatzgruppen, not on ordinary Waffen-SS soldiers. The practical result was that most Waffen-SS veterans lived out their lives without facing trial. Some carried guilt, some felt none. Some never spoke of the war. Others joined HIAG and wore their service as a badge of honor. The rehabilitation narrative gained traction in German popular memory. Films, novels, and memoirs portrayed the Waffen-SS as elite soldiers caught in the machinery of war. This narrative ignored the documented atrocities. It emphasized the battlefield courage and suffering of young men in uniform. It was effective. By the 1980s, public opinion polls showed that a significant portion of West Germans viewed Waffen-SS veterans with sympathy rather than condemnation. This alarmed historians and Jewish organizations who argued that the distinction between the Waffen-SS and other SS branches was false. They pointed to the integration of Waffen-SS units into anti-partisan operations, the use of concentration camp personnel in combat roles, and the overlap in membership and ideology. The argument was that the Waffen-SS was not an army. It was an instrument of racial war. The legal battles over pensions continued into the 1980s. HIAG lobbied successive West German governments to change Article 131. The government refused, but incremental changes occurred. In the 1960s, German courts began granting pensions to individual Waffen-SS veterans who could prove they had served exclusively in combat roles and had no involvement in war crimes. The burden of proof was on the applicant, but over time, thousands qualified. By the 1990s, many former Waffen-SS members were receiving pensions, not as SS members, but as soldiers who happened to serve in the Waffen-SS. The legal distinction was subtle, but significant. It allowed the state to maintain the criminal organization designation while acknowledging individual cases. It was a compromise that satisfied neither historians nor veterans, but allowed political closure. HIAG dissolved in 1992. By then, most veterans were elderly or dead. The organization had failed to overturn the Nuremberg verdict, but it had succeeded in shaping public memory. It had established a narrative that the Waffen-SS was a military formation rather than a criminal organization. It had secured limited pension rights. It had ensured that former SS members could live in post-war Germany without permanent stigma. The cost was historical truth. The campaign to rehabilitate the Waffen-SS required minimizing its crimes, emphasizing its military character, and portraying its members as ordinary soldiers. This narrative persists in some circles today. The reckoning with the Waffen-SS remains incomplete. War crimes trials continued sporadically into the 21st century. In 2015, Germany prosecuted Oskar Gröning, a former SS guard at Auschwitz, for complicity in the murder of 300,000 people. He was 94 years old. The trial reignited debates about collective guilt, individual responsibility, and the statute of limitations on genocide. Similar trials followed. But these cases focused on camp personnel, not combat soldiers. The Waffen-SS soldiers who participated in massacres, reprisal killings, and anti-partisan operations largely escaped prosecution, some because evidence was insufficient, some because they were never identified, some because they died before justice could reach them. What happened to the Waffen-SS after 1945 is a story of legal judgment and political reality. The Nuremberg Tribunal declared the organization criminal. That declaration had weight in law but limited impact in practice. Cold War pragmatism allowed former SS members to reintegrate into society. Economic reconstruction needed their labor. Intelligence services needed their knowledge. Political stability needed their votes. The result was selective justice. High-ranking commanders faced trials and imprisonment. Ordinary soldiers faced questionnaires and temporary exclusion. Within a decade, most had returned to normal life. Within 2 decades, many occupied positions of influence. Within 3 decades, some were receiving pensions. The Nuremberg verdict remained on the books, but its practical consequences diminished year by year. The Waffen-SS had been declared criminal, but its members had not been treated as criminals. They had been treated as veterans of a defeated army. The broader lesson is the tension between law and reality. International tribunals can declare organizations criminal. They can convict individuals. They can establish legal precedents. But they cannot rewrite the social and political landscape of a nation recovering from total war. West Germany needed stability. Stability required reintegration of millions of former soldiers. That reality created pathways for rehabilitation that bypassed justice. The pathways were legal, bureaucratic, and social. Veterans' organizations lobbied. Lawyers argued. Politicians compromised. Over decades, the sharp edges of the Nuremberg verdict were worn smooth by the friction of practical politics. The memory of the Waffen-SS remains contested. In Germany, it is legally prohibited to glorify the organization or display its symbols. Historians continue to document its crimes. Survivors and descendants of victims continue to demand recognition. Yet revisionism persists, especially online and in certain political circles. The narrative that the Waffen-SS was an elite military formation unfairly maligned by Victor's justice, finds audiences willing to believe it. Countering that narrative requires constant engagement with the historical record. The evidence is overwhelming. The Waffen-SS committed war crimes on a massive scale. Its units participated in the Holocaust. Its soldiers murdered prisoners of war. Its ideology was racial supremacy enforced by violence. These are facts, not opinions. Yet facts require defenders. The battle over the memory of the Waffen-SS is a battle over how societies remember complicity, guilt, and the limits of military honor. The Waffen-SS ended in 1945. Its legal designation as a criminal organization continues to this day. But its members lived on. They worked. They raised families. They voted. Some felt remorse. Some never did. Most remained silent. Their silence was a choice, and it shaped post-war Germany as profoundly as any tribunal verdict. The question is not merely what happened to the Waffen-SS after 1945. The question is what societies chose to do with the legacy of organized violence and whether justice deferred is justice denied. The answer remains complicated, incomplete, and uncomfortable. History does not offer clean endings. It offers consequences, and those consequences echo across generations. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.